Sí, sí, podéis aplaudir.
Yes, feel free to applaud. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Although I don't know if I should congratulate you, because as you can see, this is an event that was awaited with expectation. Everyone wanted to see Daniel Clowes, and I don't think he needs any introduction. He's one of the top contemporary comic book authors, and it would be very nice, Nacho Vigalondo, since you're here, that you tell us who he is, or who he is for you, at least.
Nadie necesita que yo les...
Nobody needs that I explain who Daniel Clowes is.
Yo creo que tenemos traducción, ¿no? Para que...
We have translation to do it in Spanish. So I'll speak in Spanish, right?
Tiene sus auriculares chiquititos azules preciosos.
He has those small, beautiful headsets. So, well, Daniel Clowes, I'm going to speak about through my memories, because I think that they are the ones that are shared by many comic lovers of my generation. In the year 1995, thanks to a great publishing house, La Cúpula, I was living at a very small village in Cantabria, northern Spain, a village where we didn't have Marvel and DC comics every month. I was able to buy like a velvet glove casting iron without knowing the author and without knowing what I had in my hands. And my community, it became like an emblem in my community. Okay? So, and for many years, it was the only book that I knew from Daniel Clowes. Although we know him much better, for some years it was easy to compare him with David Lynch. I think that you hate this comparison with Lynch, Roman Polanski, so many comic authors, Robert Kramer that we had previously known, Robert Crumb, and that was the safe guides. I mean, maybe I would have become a rockabilly or a gothic person in another life, but I started to read Daniel Clowes, and I became into an underground comic reader. There was some kind of urban tribe, so that's a great responsibility to focus on that. So since then, well, we've known that his limits go beyond the existential roles that we had in that comic. We saw that was a part of a magazine that he published. Well, he was not the publisher, but he did everything from the cover to the ads. He did the mailing section. It was very accurate designed, and there were some. He even sold ties by mail, where he had sexy women drawn.
Two.
At which price?
$100.
$100.
And people assumed there's no way they were $100, so they would send me $1.
Oh, just missing the point for the comma. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
And when they did that, I would draw a picture of a tie and send it back on a postcard.
Oh my God. Do you know are those in eBay? Is someone trying to resell those ties?
I know who owns the ties. A collector has bought them. The two.
A collector.
Yeah.
So you have located both of them.
Yeah. No, I don't have them, but there's a crazed American collector who has both the ties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
God bless him.
He has a big seller just for the ties.
I don't know if he wears them or if, I don't know.
He's holding those in a dark room, like one of the gold from the Nazis.
Exactly. Exactly like that.
Ahora sabemos que es un autor que.
Well, we know that he's an author. For example, in Naples, in his magazine, although it seems that he controls every single element as regards content, etc. It's a magazine that goes out of control, because apart from this existential role, he included very rude jokes, very dirty jokes, the side about a man that wanted to fuck insects. And step by step,
Poco a poco su estilo.
and step by step, he's still open to the possibility of some kind of realism, portrait of some characters with a. Well, I'd love to know what he's thinking right now. So he stopped to hate all his characters step by step. He started to love some of them. And through the next graphic novels that he's published that are more well known for the audience, he has become the portrait author of the human condition that we know. Not only that,
You have written all the adaptations of your comic books for movies.
Yes, I have. I now kind of wish that I had just given them all to somebody else, because movies never turn out the way, as you know, they never turn out the way the script is written, and there's all these things that happen during the making of a movie or in the editing that changes everything around, and then it just becomes so different than what I had in mind. That
But while trying to do all the scripts, is this a case of being a control freak?
Yes.
Or are you okay?
Yes.
So you're not interested in retelling the possibilities of retelling your graphic novels into a different language?
I was for a while being involved in that, and now I like the idea of somebody retelling it their own version, and it has nothing to do with me. That used to be totally unappealing. I didn't want to have anybody sort of pollute the world that I was creating, but now it seems like something that's just entirely separate from me.
Okay, you don't even want to watch them. You just.
I like the idea of like buying a ticket or going to the premiere and seeing it for the first time, which is kind of what happened with the Wilson movie.
Okay.
I had written the script and then it was made without my involvement, and I got to see it all finished for the first time, and it felt like, what, this has nothing to do with me. It felt like a totally different outside experience. And yet there were, jokes that I had written and things like that. And I didn't feel connected to it.
Y no sé si en el caso de Ghost World también pasó eso.
I don't know if it happened also in Ghost World, because earlier Daniel Clowes was telling us that in the case of Ghost World, that was a movie that many people had access to his world. I don't know if he had achieved that either through the comic or the movie, he had managed to make this movie and this comic book like this teenager that grows up and leaves the house, leaves the nest. I don't think if you had achieved this through your comic book or with the movie.
No era tan larga la pregunta.
The question wasn't that long.
Sí o no, es que se está pensando la.
we don't know if it was a translation or maybe he's thinking the answer. No sé si
I mean that with no disrespect.
¿Qué tal Ghost World, la adaptación?
What do you think about the adaptation of Ghost World? Did you like it?
You have to dumb it down for us Americans. It was. I thought it was great. I thought it came to life, and it was its own thing. I mean, I think what I liked about it was that it wasn't, and just like the comic turned into actors, it was an actual movie on its own merits that's actually very different from the comic. Mm-hmm. People either like one or the other, usually.
Mm-hmm. ¿En tu caso?
In your case, Nacho? A straight
¿Cómic o película?
No sé exactamente si creo que
I think that
esa es mi opinión sobre Ghost World, pero aún así te voy a contestar. Creo que la película, recuerdo que el final era sorprendentemente más depresivo que el del cómic, si mal no quiero recordar. O sea, que sí que el cómic.
So sorry. Maybe the end was a little bit more depressive than the comic. Okay, a little bit more depressing than the comic.
I swear.
My translator spaced out and didn't translate the whole thing, so.
And
now I'm totally confused. This is like literally being in like the worst. One of my nightmarish stories where it's like I'm hearing different voices in my head. It's like being schizophrenic.
So I was say, should I speak? I don't know what to do right now. Maybe he's the only one who can.
Chaos.
Makes
Let's
chaos.
get out of here.
I'm sorry. It didn't make sense. So what I was saying is that watching the movie, I was surprised that the ending was slightly more depressing than the ending of the Ghost War comic book.
Yeah, and it was. Well, I'm not sure if that ending of the movie is depressing or not. I can't decide. It was, as you know, how films are made. It was an ending we found in the editing room. It was not in our script. Was
not in the script.
Much closer to the comic, really.
I feel like the ending for the Steve Buscemi character was kind of bleak compared to what happened.
Well, it was what was in the movie was bleak, but it was about a 100th as bleak as what Terry and I tried to put as the end. We actually were going to have an ending where you see him throwing a noose over a pipe in his room, and he sort of has this like resigned expression on his face, and the producers were like, no, you cannot do that. So we gave him the hope where he's like living with his mother. We thought, that's sort of depressing, but not quite as bad as the noose.
Me quedo antes con ganas de saber cuando tú estabas presente.
Before, I wanted to know, when you were introducing him, talking about the dark characters that maybe he hated, and with time he had come to love. I don't know what's your opinion, what Daniel Clowes' opinion about his relationship with his characters, that some of them were really hideous. What's his relationship with this type of characters that might really gender this type of hatred? What's your relationship with your characters?
Well, I try to start out with characters that I find interesting, which are rarely people who are like well-adjusted and happy and, like just going to work every day. It's not very interesting. So I usually start with very difficult characters that are like one part of my personality magnified. So they're, they're very angry. They're resentful, jealous, all these things, and I exaggerate that and sort of turn it into a character. They're like living id creatures, coming from that part of my brain. And then, I often find them funny, because they're so obnoxious and awful. And then throughout the course of the story, my goal is to inhabit them, find some connection with them, and ultimately to feel like we've been on a journey together as we've made this story, and I feel like I love them and I appreciate them in all their horror.
Yeah,
En español.
Spanish, please. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it was a little bit of a mess. I haven't slept very well today. So, one of the most important characters of the most cynical and satiric era is Pussy, who was a fictitious a cartoonist, and used that character to hate the rest of the industry, including the independent industry, but especially what by then was the mainstream of the comics, that was superheroes, sword and witches, fantasy, etc. So during that time, that mainstream was a subculture, but now it's everything. I mean, it's total mainstream. So you live in an environment where you used to hate is much more important. So how you live that aspect? Direct question.
Well, yes. When I first began in comics, I remember going to a little comic book convention, and I had my little comics, and I thought, everybody's going to love these. I'm going to have, a line around the block. And, they are stacked up, and I would see people like, lining up, coming over, and then going to the person next to me. And then all of a sudden he had this immense long line, and I looked over, what's he doing? And he was doing just the worst, like 15th rate superhero comic, where it's just if you took Jack Kirby and then imitated him and then imitated that person and then somebody else imitated, and it was way down the line where it's just the lowest form of dreck, and he had lines down the block, and so I was that was when I thought, like, I'm going to get revenge and do, draw my character who sort of embodied that whole world of comics. And it felt at that time like, it's only a matter of time before, like, comics, the kind of comics that I do and my friends do that are about, real life situations. They're about, they're funny. They're much more in line with what was in movies, novels, things like that. That those would one day catch on, and all the superhero stuff would just be forgotten, and just be like, we went through this immature phase as a culture, and that's what we did. But of course, how wrong was I? We didn't. I never thought, like, one day I would be on a train, like just out in public, and that normal people would be like talking about Thor and Iron Man. Like that was like the province of like the lowest, people in society who would never publicly admit that they were interested in stuff like that. And now it's like number 1 at the box office. So the joke has been on me all along.
Sin embargo, hay otro punto en el que
However, there's another point at where the comic books are right now, which is in the line of Sabrina, which is a candidate for a Man Booker or Spiegelman with a Pulitzer back in the time. There's a type of life for comic books that maybe will lead us to having a comic book winning a literature Nobel Prize. Would that be interesting for you?
I've never thought prizes in art are a good idea. I don't think it's, nothing really good ever wins the prize. It's always something that is sort of politically the right choice for that moment. But, if you look through the history of movie awards, it's always stuff that nobody ever goes to see any of the movies that won the Academy Award in 1960. It's probably like Ben-Hur or something like that. Nobody sees those movies, and the movies that nobody ever would have thought of in the day that were probably ignored at the box office and thought of as difficult or weird or just not quite right. Those are the movies that ultimately find their voice in culture and live on. So I think, searching for these kind of accolades for comics is never something that should be on the mind of an artist, at least. It's fine for it to be on the minds of people involved in culture, but I know of artists who are out to, like, I'm going to write this graphic novel that will win me awards, and I always think, like, that's not going to be anything good. Like,
puedes darnos nombres.
Can you give us any names?
I'll be tweeting it later this afternoon. So
En tu cuenta de Twitter oficial.
Your Twitter account.
Es por esa misma línea, supongo que.
That's why you also reject the term graphic novel, because you think that it's pretentious.
Well, now I'm used to it, but when it first began, people said, you would tell somebody, I do comics, and then they would go and read them, and they would say, hey, these are actually pretty good. I remember comics were terrible. These are actually like slightly better than that. So I feel good about that. And if you say, if people go like, I don't really like comics, and you say, you say like, well, I don't do comics, I do graphic novels. They would go to the store and I'm going to try one of these graphic novels, and they'd go home and go, it's just a comic. I got fooled again. It'd be like if you made up some like weird name for chocolate milk or something, and I'm going to try this new product. It's called Sluggo or whatever. It's like, oh, it's just chocolate milk. It just feels like you're tricking people. So, and it also all the books that have gotten their acclaim as graphic novels mostly are not novels. Like Mouse is a memoir, Persepolis, Fun Home. These are all big graphic novels that are not novels. So it's a very inaccurate term. Mm-hmm. It always sounds like it's describing like a sexy novel or something. It's very graphic.
Paciencia, que en España disfruta de una...
Well, Patience, that in Spain has a great edition by Fulgencio Pimentel, thank you. It seems that it's the first graphic novel where you seem to accept that format, the size and density, because up to now, in all your, between very common graphic novels, you're always trying to reject the format every page. You're trying to look at some a collection of strips coming from different authors. So it seems that they're coming from different sources, like if it was a collection of different comics rather than a unity. Okay, so do you miss that format of 8-ball to publish some monthly publications at a lower price? Do you miss that time?
Well, I feel like my goals kind of changed at the same time the whole kind of marketplace changed. You know, for a long time I really liked the idea of being limited, doing short stories, you know, kind of keeping everything in a very short time frame. I always thought, like, you know, I always feel like something horrible is going to happen, like in the near future. So you feel like, okay, you know, if I make it 4 months, I'll be done with this issue, and then it'll be out. You know, I don't have to worry about it. But then at a certain point, I got so that everything I was doing, I kept adding and making it longer and more detailed, and I got more interested in just the complexity of the stories and having the characters have some room to move around and do things. And so that kind of just coincided with when, you know, people actively told me, like, we do not want you to do comic books. You know, that was like bookstores and publishers and things were just like, we can't make money with these things anymore. You know, so it kind of worked out in my case. It would be tragic if I had gone the opposite way, and now I want to do these little pamphlets that nobody wants to sell or buy, you know. But if I ever got ideas for short stories again, I would just go right back to doing that. It's just, it doesn't feel like my interest anymore.
Yeah. Y si las cosas van muy mal,
and if things go really bad, we can always paint ties again.
The tie thing was never fully fulfilled.
De hecho, ahora estás trabajando en...
Right now, you're working on a long piece of work. We know that you don't want to give us many details, but please give us some.
No.
¿Va a ser más larga que Paciencia?
Is it going to be longer than Patience? Maybe you still don't know because you haven't finished it?
Part of the reason I don't like to talk about it is because I like to lie to myself. Because if I said, oh, this is going to be another like 200 pages, I would just quit. I would just, I'm not going to do that. That's too long. But if I keep telling myself, oh, it's only like 10 more pages, then I can do that. So that's a big reason of why I don't talk about it, because it's debilitating to hear yourself describe something and realize how much work you're going to have to do.
Porque ese también además es tu proceso de trabajo.
That's also your work process. You like to be surprised by the work that you're doing, and you like your characters to have their own lives and to have their own ways to deal with the stories.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't want to commit to something, you know, even if it's just an offhand comment, you know, in Spain. I could, you know, I don't want to like just say something that I might later think like, that's not at all what it's about. And then I'll think like, maybe you know, what if somebody read that and they realize I changed the story in the middle of the process? It seems really unprofessional or something. So I just don't want to have any pressure. I don't let anybody read anything until I'm completely finished. I like to do it all entirely inside my own head, for better or worse, and then inflict it on my poor wife to read for the first time, who has to read it with a completely blank affect and not show any emotion. And then a few friends start to read it, and then, you know, then it's done. Then it's out there. I can't change it.
¿Y quiénes son esos primeros amigos? Si alguno es algún autor de cómic.
Who are the first friends, and after your wife, who are allowed to read your books? Who are the first friends who get to read your book after you finish it?
Well, for Patience, I had a friend named Alvin Buenaventura who unfortunately passed away right before the book came out, and he was he was sort of the first person to read it after my wife and gave me all these notes. And he had been the first person to read my last 3 or 4 books. So I'm going to have a new victim now to inflict it on. He was very well trained to not ever like tip his hand and say anything. I actually used to have a guy who helped me do my computer coloring, and he was so great because he was purely there for the technical aspect of it. He had no input in the story, but he could be so like just blank, like just totally like here's your story, you know, and it's and he would never be like, I didn't really like this part. You know, they're just complete like poker face. So I greatly appreciated that.
O sea que verdaderamente hacer cómics, como dices tú.
So truly to draw a comic book is a dictatorship, which is something that you describe as opposed to making a movie, which not you describe as a democracy, because there are other people who help you rule your work of art. But
so, movies are a dictatorship, but they are a failed dictatorship. But you never have the possibility of being as authoritarian as you would like to. So it's another type of adventure, so to speak, another type of circumstance. But well, I don't know, I guess that in the worst scenario, maybe through the accident of the lack of discipline and the lack of respect to the creator, the result could be better than expected. I'm being as realistic as I can be. So this is because if you have helpers, Daniel, or not, with color, etc., so the result of your works is maybe what you wanted, although you show it to somebody that gives you some hints, but the result of every comic is from the beginning what you wanted to get it, right?
I mean, I really don't have any helpers in my comic. This fellow is merely just inputting like instructions. I mean, I have a real obsession with doing every single thing myself. I don't even like if, you know, like I think I once let my wife black in a little area in the background of something, and it drove me insane. And I think I like blacked over it because I mean, that's sort of the whole appeal of the medium, is that you are absolutely like the fascist dictator over this little piece of paper. And, you know, I may not have anybody in the world I can boss around or get to do anything, but I can make that damn little piece of paper, you know, do what I want. And that's, there's nothing like that. You know, it's like having your own movie studio where you can make them work all night and, you know, they don't get union wages or anything like that.
Volviendo a los 90, recuerdo que en las...
So going back to the 90s, I remember that during the interviews of that time that we could read at some Spanish magazines, between you and the authors that you're related to, like Charles Barnes or Chester Brown, etc., there was a great feeling of partnership as you were really together. So there was not a competition feeling. Do you keep in touch with these artists today? Some of them, do some of them read your works? Maybe they are not the first readers, but maybe they're looking for their approval? Or do you stick to their criteria?
All these artists who are all, you know, people I feel very close brotherhood, sisterhood, you know, whatever they are. I feel very connected to the people who like started in the same era I did, because we were all, there was just no world for us to join. You know, there was no like underground comic scene or anything like that. There were just like, there was nothing happening in American comics at the time. It was just like Marvel and DC, and that was it. And we were all people who like had grown up kind of reading the undergrounds and reading old comics from the 50s and deciding like, well, maybe I'll try doing my own comics. And we all came from totally different places. You know, I came from Chicago. The Hernandez brothers were in Los Angeles. Chester Brown was in Toronto. You know, we would meet up at comic conventions and things, but we didn't have any real interaction. You know, I didn't have anybody that I lived nearby, really, that I was friends with. But I think people imagine us all like working in a room where it's like Chester's drawing board is here and I'm right here, and we're like, hey, dude, you know, high five.
Es una bonita fantasía, la verdad.
It's a little bit fantasy, yeah.
Yeah. But
Creo que desde el punto de vista...
Well, I think that from the consumer point of view, from the fan of this type of comics, I think there was a feeling of scene, that there was a group of artists moving towards the same direction or very similar directions, and now there are new talents, but maybe because of the change in the market, because of the move from magazines to the big graphic novels, it seems that every author lives at a separated island. I don't know if this is a fantasy just by the reader or not.
we were all on our separate islands at all times. Yeah, we were never, we would see each other once a year, and all we would do is gossip about other artists. It was like, because back then there was no way to get information about anything. It was like the Stone Age. And so we were just always, I've met this one person. What's he like? And it was, but we all had a shorthand when we met, because we'd read each other's comics, Like anytime you talk to somebody like Chester Brown, they'll start to tell you a story of something that happened to them, and you go like, "No, I know that because I read issue 15 where you told me." And it's a very strange experience. It's stranger to meet people who don't do comics and they know you because of what you've done in your comics, but you don't know them. So it's a very different relationship.
Me gustaría que habláramos de
I would like us to talk about your influences beyond comic books from other authors like Robert Crumb, etc. But I would like to talk about influences from the movies, from the noir movies, from the 50s, the 60s, the pulp novels. Everything is very visible from the early times until now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in early 60s. And so there was this whole kind of boom in America, the post-war era, 1946 up through when I was going away to college in the 80s. That was, it was like, people coming back from these horrible wars that we've all fought through and trying to live this like happy, prosperous life in America where everybody has a huge car and a nice house and the culture was very much like became this kind of monolithic thing where it was controlled by only a few entities, and so there was all this like horror and anger and fear and stuff that had happened just 5 years earlier, that was just billowing up through this culture that came out in some of these Hollywood movies, film noir and things like that really had these characters that were haunted and rageful and it felt like they had a certain truth to them that people weren't allowed to speak about. And I feel like the parents that came back from the war that were these film noir characters then gave birth to the hippie generation that was another kind of, a way that the culture kind of bubbled up into expressing this whole thing, and then I was sort of the child of that era of hippies. So I feel this weird continuum of post-war culture that just came through movies, pulp magazines, science fiction, comic books, all these kind of things that are almost all uniformly really interesting from that era. They all have this the overt text of these things is one thing, but the subtext that's underneath is very different, much darker.
Yo creo que además, Nacho, si sabes leer entre sus cómics.
Also, Nacho, if you know how to read between the lines in his comics, you can find all these references from the cinema, etc.
Hasta Paciencia.
The surprising thing is that until Patience, you didn't embrace science fiction in whole. And there are moments that, before reading the comic, it seems that it's a pulp story of science fiction without being really pretentious. So maybe you want to refuse the possibility of being in front of something that I've read, that something that you reject. That is the idea of making the great American graphic novel. At the beginnings, like science fiction, Impatience is the starting point in a humble way, so to speak. But after that, the story has a great resonance in other senses, right?
Well, I'm much more interested in the fiction part of science fiction, and I never wanted to do something that required me to actually know science, because as my son will tell you, I know nothing.
Yeah.
I can't understand the most basic, like why does water boil? It's a mystery. and so I know if I ever tried to address anything that had any plausibility to it, it would everybody would laugh at it and it would not work. And so I wanted to come up with a story where the science was, you could sort of put it off to the side and kind of imagine that that the guy could time travel, but of course it makes no sense. I have I didn't ever like come up with a reason why it's actually working. It's just, it's the same device as in a fairy tale when you have 3 wishes, or the genie can tell you, give you a wish or something like that. I was really thinking more in those terms. And time travel seems more like a modern fairy tale. It's something that we all are aware of and think about in a way that, I'm not sure. I always wonder, like, when did people first think of time travel? Like, I'm going to walk back to my grandfather's day and walk around, or, go back to ancient Greece and walk, I think it's a very modern idea of wish fulfillment.
Yeah. Porque siendo la nostalgia.
Because, well, maybe nostalgia is a feeling that has its traps, of course. But right now we live in a society that is too affected by nostalgia. Maybe the time machine is the only legitimate way of traveling to the past. It's literally speaking, because you have got into a machine and you're not trapped in your memories, right?
When I first began working on patients, I had just gotten through putting together a big exhibition of my work and doing like a monograph of my old work. And so I was looking at old photos and really early artwork and like old reviews and things like that. And it was like looking at a different world. And I felt like I'm examining this artist, and I did not feel like I was that artist. I felt like I was a totally different person than that artist. And I almost didn't recognize myself in this person. And so it felt very much like time traveling, like I was this old man going back to look at this younger version.
Además tú eres un caso especial.
So you're a special case of an artist that is really self-conscious and also tries to project himself in your works. In your case, you're trying to review your past works. That means to find you again in many aspects, right?
Yeah. So that was what was kind of the impetus for the whole story, because I just felt like I was I'm trying to think how to say it. It's I just felt like I was not exactly like living in my own world. I felt like I had created this world that was my life, that had followed all these different patterns, and that I had somehow, because of the work of this younger man, wound up who I am. And that's very much like the guy in Patience is, he is, the younger character is sort of like a nice, well-adjusted young man, but within him, somehow, because of all these terrible decisions that come his way, he becomes this much more like malignant, angry, older man. And I felt like that was, not necessarily that was what I was, but I felt like I was that far away from my younger self.
Yeah. Sí, puede ser una manera intentar proyectar.
So maybe you could try to reflect the same in characters that are much worse than yourself. Some kind of trying to not to. Sorry, could you ask him to repeat the question?
The translator's asking you to repeat the question.
So okay.
En español.
So, yeah. First of all, you put characters that are the worst version of yourself that could be as a therapy, not to follow that way, to become into that person. So in order not to see your mistakes, I'm not as bad. So it works for both things, right?
Right. Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, Like I had a book called Wilson a few years ago that's about a guy who, the way he began is, I'm like the kind of person who goes out to a cafe and tries to get some work done away from the house, and I just want to be left alone. And there's often these types of people who can spot someone like me as like the perfect victim, and they will, hey, can I sit here? And like, oh, I'm actually working, and they'll like, that's okay, and start telling me about their life. And I thought, like, that's, and I will go home and tell my wife, and like, I was victimized by this other person again. And then I deep down sort of admire that. That's the opposite of me. I wish I could be the person who just doesn't care. I'm going to sit here. And so I start to write characters that are like my nemesis, and to see, like, what do we have in common? Are we really both the same, two sides of the same coin?
Todos querríamos.
We would all like to think that we are the nemesis of Wilson's, but I think he's a character that maybe you might say I'm crazy, but I think Wilson is a person with whom we can empathize at some point, can't we?
That may say a lot about the Spanish people, that they empathize with you.
Luego podéis contar vosotros si nos pasa eso alguna vez.
Maybe you can also say if that doesn't happen to you when you speak your minds in the moment, and you say just to give everyone back what they deserve.
Well, he's basically like, in comics you have the thought bubble. He's me if those thought bubbles turn to speech bubble.
Vale, me queda
to me, I think the most successful part of that book, and I don't normally say that about anything, is that he never thinks. In the whole book, he's just talking, and he's mostly alone, and he's just wandering through the world talking out loud. And because it's a comic book, you somehow don't seem to notice. It's fine. But when we were talking originally about making the movie, we thought, like, are we going to have just Woody Harrelson walk around talking to himself? He'd just seem crazy, but somehow the magic of comics is that a person can walk around talking to themselves.
Oye, volviendo a paciencia.
Going back to Patience, and this is a question for Nacho. Reading Patience, didn't you feel like asking Clowes to let you adapt it to the movies?
So, si yo ahora...
It would be very embarrassing if I now took the advantage of this moment. I think that you are putting us in a very tense situation, right? Would it be a good movie?
Dirigida por ti, digo.
Would it be a good movie? Well, I'm sure of that. Well, in order to avoid an embarrassing moment right now, I think that Daniel Clowes has been spending very hard days with many interviews, signing many books, and the worst thing that could happen right now is that somebody asks him for his rights to adapt one of his comics. This can't happen, okay? So in some way, I've been stealing from him all my life. No, that's worse. No. I've been cautiously stealing from him because nobody has ever seen that. Well, Nacho, no. I've never seen anything in written form about any complaint that I've stolen anything, or I've used the influence that Daniel Clowes could have over me. But I have not only stolen many things from his stories for my movies, but I also think that the worst movies, are the ones where I've stolen the least. And I think that my last movie that I like the most is the one where I've most stolen from your work. So from here on, it would be an abuse to ask officially for a creative marriage. So,
as soon as he sees your movie, he'll appreciate
With like paperwork.
En España todo esto es diferente.
in Spain, this works differently, okay?
Bueno, no necesariamente. No.
Well, it doesn't mean really stealing, but every artist has a legacy from all the influences. We were talking about yours earlier. You have said sometimes that you were afraid that with all these influences, you might end up carrying out some plagiarism from all the works that you have seen and all the influences that you have had. Maybe Daniel Clowes has maybe stolen from other authors unconsciously, I'm sure.
The translator said that maybe I have stolen from other authors unconsciously, I'm sure. So I thought that was very nice. I used to actually, like, I'd find old panels in comic books and like old record covers and things like that were totally obscured. Nobody would know about them except for a tiny handful of people, and I would draw panels based on them. But the idea was not to like get away with like I stole the artwork. It was to find like the 4 people in the world that would recognize it and go, he based it on this rare album that only I have. And they would write to me and we'd be friends. You know, that was sort of the, and then, you know, after the internet came along, people found all those images and were like, he swiped this from, and it was impossible to explain. Like, you know, that was done in the spirit of camaraderie. It was not to, you know, to take credit for what was usually a like a really ridiculously weird piece of artwork.
Como que lo estamos enfocando en robar, pero realmente lo que estamos...
We're talking about art. We're talking about a chain of legacies that each of us get from the previous authors. And if we're lucky enough, we will leave in the ones who come after us.
La influencia.
So how do you consider, or how do you assess the influence that you've had from other comic authors that you could have? I mean, do you think about it, or do you prefer to look in other direction?
I like, you know, I don't like it when somebody just, you know, imitates, like literally like copies a drawing, or does like, you know, Shia LaBeouf and steals my movie. But I love it. I love to see little influences that I know the artist doesn't even know themselves. Like they get little things just out of the air that I know, like that I was the first one to do that, or that's something that I did and then somebody else did, and then I know that's where they got it from. And it feels really cool to be part of this whole long continuum of comics culture and history, you know, to see, and it's always just a tiny little thing, but it feels cool. But of course there's a line that can be crossed where somebody can just copy.
Influir a otros es el orgullo.
To have an influence over others is the final pride, is better than a good criticism or than a good sale.
Yeah, that's, you know, what's the phrase? Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So it does feel that way. And I often there'll be artists I really like, younger artists, and I'll see they're not influenced by me at all. And I'll be like, what's wrong with me? You know, like, why can't you rip me off?
Has mencionado así a la vez.
Well, you mentioned... Sorry, could you ask him to repeat the question again? You mentioned Shia LaBeouf, yeah, sorry. The problem that you had with him, it's not taboo. You can speak about that during the interview, okay, if you want.
¿Qué cojones pasó ahí?
What the fuck went off there? I mean, what happened there? Why everything ended up with Shia LaBeouf renting a plane to paint the words "I'm sorry" with a plane?
It was a very surreal thing for me, because it was just a December morning, and checking my email, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you never told me about the Shia LaBeouf thing," and that was it. That was the whole email, and I was like, what is he talking about? And I look on the internet, like, what? And there's nothing. My name is not mentioned. And I was like, I don't know what this guy means. And so I wrote back, what do you mean? And he sent me a link to this film that Shia had made that he'd just put on the internet. And I watched it without any thought of what it was. And only halfway through did I think, like, wait, I wrote this. Every single word
word by word.
Literally every word, every shot, everything about it, except for he changed all the names, was mine. And then at the end it comes on like, written and directed by Shia LaBeouf. And my first thought was like, did I let him do this? Like, did I, like, I really thought I must have met him like 10 years ago when I didn't know who he was and signed up, like, sure, here, you know. It was so surreal and confusing. And I wound up, you know, somebody within like an hour figured out that it was adapted by me. And they started asking me like, oh, you know, how come your name's not on there? And I just made one statement. I was just like, this is literally the first I've heard of this. I have no idea what he was thinking. And then he went out of his mind and that, you know, but then I had to literally every day, like get up and phone calls all day from like, you know, this is CNN. Do you know, come to the studio. And it's like, I don't want to talk about Shia LaBeouf. And I was like, is it going to be the rest of my life? I Google my name and it's like Shia LaBeouf, Clowes, you know. So luckily, it seems to have disappeared, and it's one of those strange stories that you know people don't necessarily have to think about anymore.
Otra de las historias curiosas.
Other funny story. Before we go to the Q&A, we're going to ask you the last questions also, Nacho, because I would like him to tell the story. Maybe this has led him to meet fans differently when he met David Lynch once at dinner for the Oscar nominees. Has that changed the way that you meet other fans later? Could you tell us the story about what happened when you met David Lynch?
We were very fortunate to get nominated for an Academy Award for Ghost World. And there's a thing the Oscar people do where they have a big lunch for all the nominees. And you come down, it's a few weeks before the actual ceremony. And they have these tables that hold maybe 7 or 8 people. And you actually like draw your name out of a hat to see who you sit with. And so I was with Terry Zwigoff, and we were seated separately. And I look, and Terry Zwigoff sitting with these like these producers that he had no connection with, like these total like Hollywood guys who are like, hey Terry, what are you doing? You know, and he was just sitting there so uncomfortable and miserable. And I'm like, who's at my table? And it was David Lynch and the documentarian Albert Maysles, who's like one of the greatest documentary filmmakers of all time. And that's who we're with. And so my wife and I are just sitting there as David Lynch is at our table, and we're both like, we couldn't talk to him. We were just too nervous. Like, I just wanted to ask him some question, and I don't want to seem like an idiot. And so we just like listened to him kind of gossiping with his wife and looking out at, he would see actresses walking across the room and yell out at him and stuff. And so finally he was like, well, I'm gonna leave. You know, it's been nice meeting everybody, even though we never said a word. And my wife, you know, to her great credit, grabbed his arm and said, we just want you to know that you're our hero. And he just looked down and just went, out of sight. And then he walked away. And that was kind of the perfect moment of meeting somebody that you admire.
¿Y puedes seguir viendo sus películas después?
Can you still watch his movies later?
Oh yeah, I love all his movies. I think all his movies are masterpieces.
Eres una gran persona.
You're a great person.
Pues si no tienes así un apunte último, Nacho, vamos a...
If you don't have anything else to say, Nacho, we're going to open the Q&A so that the audience can ask you questions, all the people who have come here to listen to you and ask you questions. I don't know where we can start. If you have any questions, probably this is the first time that you have Daniel Clowes near you. So if you have any questions, I see a hand raised over there, maybe on the other side of the room. They don't feel so inspired.
Daniel, si...
I would like to ask Daniel if there's any Spanish author that is particularly interested and with whom he has, maybe that he has met, for example, this last weekend in Barcelona, and how was that experience if you've had the opportunity? And generally speaking, if you are particularly interested on any Spanish author.
No, I know of a few Spanish cartoonists, and I actually didn't meet too many people at the convention. I was too busy sitting behind a table looking down at books. There's an artist I love, a Spanish artist named Martí, who did a book called The Cabbie. Do you know this?
Yeah, taxi.
In the U.S. it was called The Cabbie,
Okay,
but
okay.
it's like one of my absolute all-time favorites. It's just this really dark, grim, crazy kind of version of the American comic book Dick Tracy about a malevolent cab driver. And I was hoping I'd meet him, but apparently he like never leaves the house. So.
¿No seáis tímidos?
Don't be shy.
Oh, I was like, what's that noise?
O sea, aquí hay gente más valiente.
Let's see if there are braver people with questions. Over there, there's somebody who wants to ask a question over there.
The Spanish are very shy, I've noticed.
Quería preguntar respecto a...
I'd like to ask about the influences if you've seen Under Silver Light. Under Silver Light, right? I don't know if that's the name. There's a movie that says that it looks like like a velvet glove casting iron. I don't know if you watched that, if you have any impression about it, if you recognize your influence. I don't know.
I have not seen it, but I've gotten about 100 emails about it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you really need to see this. So I'm a little nervous. Have you seen it?
Se parece mucho a David Boring.
It's quite similar to David Boring.
No quiero tensar la situación.
I don't want to make it more stressful, okay? I won't launch the first stone, okay?
Okay.
Hi, Daniel. Just a simple question.
Thank you.
What's a typical working day for you?
I can't really work in the morning. My brain doesn't function in the morning, and so I drink a lot of coffee to try to get awake. And then by doing that, my hand shakes, so I can't work. So it's this kind of endless cycle. But once I finally settle into it, I tend to work, 5 or 6 hours every day. Just plodding through. It's very boring. People have thought like, I'd like to make a documentary film about you. And it would be like the most boring movie you could ever make. That would just be like making a movie of just like a guy sitting there. It's like one of those Andy Warhol movies where like a fly goes by and everybody's like, wow, So, it's very unglamorous and plodding and like just a little every day, a little bit gets done. And it feels exciting to me to be, as I'm doing it, but I wouldn't wish anybody else to have to endure watching it.
A mí me gustaría saber qué hace cuando no.
I would like to know what he does when you don't get any inspiration, when you're drawing, what makes you have some air into your brain between one idea and the next, maybe watching movies, which is one of your passions?
I don't believe in inspiration. I think I used to feel like you have to be inspired, it has to be, and I would do work while very inspired, and then I would do other work while I was not at all inspired, but I had to finish it just because the deadline was coming. And looking back on it, they're exactly the same. No, I could never tell the difference between the two. And it made me realize that that really the key is to just keep going, and if it doesn't work out, you go back and fix it. But you've got to keep moving. You can't wait. If you wait, you're doomed.
La última pregunta.
The last question, anyone now? Maybe never then?
It's never.
¿Tienes planes de no volver a España jamás?
Do you have plans not to ever come back to Spain?
Go to places where they ask a lot of questions.
Mira, tenemos la última.
Well, we have the last one.
You've talked about your process in the current project that you're working on, and you've said that you keep lying to yourself about the whole process. So my question is if that has been the same protocol for your just for your comic books. You don't start with a text, with the whole development of the story, and then you start drawing. You just start drawing story,
I have done it every way because I've always thought like there's going to be this really easy way to do it, and once I find that, I will just draw it that way, and I'll do it every time, and it'll be be fun and easy. And so every single book I do, I'm like, I'm going to script out every single panel and do, or I'm going to just make it up as I go along, do it. I've done books where I just start with one panel, I have no idea what's in the next one or that, and I just keep going. And they all turn out the same way, and none of them are comfortable. So I'm still looking, and maybe one day, when I'm on my deathbed, I'll probably be like, I figured it out,
Bueno, queremos agradecer.
Well, thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Nacho Vigalondo, and of course, Daniel Clowes. We hope that this has been a great experience, this trip that you're taking around our country. This is the first time that we have had the honor of having you here, and we would like to think that your image of this country is a very good one.
It is.
Muchas gracias a todos. Y simplemente recordaros que aquí termina.
Just thank you, everyone. Just to remind you that this is the finish of the closing of the event, and we don't have any signatures for signing.